This video covers how to create standard deviation band graphs using SSD4R. You can follow us on Twitter, SSD4R, or find us on Facebook by searching SSD4R. To begin with, we assume that you've installed R and RStudio, and that you have also installed the SSD4R package. If you haven't done so, you can review our videos on downloading R and installing SSD4R and getting started with SSD4R, which goes over installing the package. Now, if you've accomplished that, click on, and you have RStudio open, click on Packages in the right panel. And we're going to have to load the package. So scroll down until you see SSD4R and click on the check mark next to SSD4R, and that will load it. If you wanted to, you could also in the console type require between quotation marks SSD4R, and there are and be mindful of the upper and lower case characters and hit enter. Now once the package is loaded, the next step would be, if you haven't done so already, is to download our example file, which is located on our website, ssdanalysis.com. So I'm going to go to the home page, and here's the home page, and you would scroll down till you see the basic example, and I'm using a Mac, so I'm going to click Control right click, and I'm going to save the link as, and I'm going to save it in my desktop, and I'm going to click Save. Now if you're using a PC, you won't get this message. If you're using a Mac, you might get this message, so select Don't Append, and I'm going to replace it. If you're running a PC, you would see Save Target As. Now the file is saved, and we're ready to go by beginning to open the file. So let's click on Get, CSV, open, close parentheses, and it's on my desktop. So I'm going to open the file, and now you'll receive a set of instructions. You always get these instructions when you open up a file. You need to attach the file by typing attach SSD, and if you want to list the names, you would type list names and followed by parentheses, and it'll give you an alphabetical listing. If you want the names of the variables in the file in the order they appear in the file, use the R command, names, and between parentheses type SSD. Anytime you open up a file in SSD4R, it will create a vector SSD where the data will be contained while you're using it. And when you open up another data set, could have a different name, it will copy it into that SSD vector. Okay, and you only be working with one file at a time. So let's say you wanted to get some visual understanding of cry and pcry by using standard deviation bands. There are a number of standard deviation bands that you can create in the package. Let's take a look at help. Let's click on this hyperlink to SSD4R, which will bring up help, and there are actually 4 different versions of band graphs. There's the SD1 band graph and SD2 band graph, which create standard deviation band graphs for a single phase. So if you're only working with baseline data and you wanted to get the band graphs, you would use that one or the other. If you wanted one band, obviously SD1, and two bands, SD2 band graph. On the other hand, if you had more than one phase and you wanted a band graph through the phases, you would use the SD1 or SD2 band graph, 1 meaning 1 standard deviation and 2 meaning 2 standard deviation bands. So you could also use the SD1 band graph even if you have multiple phases. So if you wanted to just show the baseline, you could use the SD1 band graph to do that, or just the intervention, you could also do that. So let's begin by doing an SD2 band graph of the baseline data for this behavior of crying, a child's crying behavior at school. And associated to that is a crying behavior is the phase variable. So let's take a look at those. If you type cry, you'll see that you have you have different observations, and one representing day 1 where there was 1 crying episode, and here's day 2 where there was 3, and then there was 4 and 5 and 6 and 7, and went straight up. And here now we see an NA, which means the next phase begins, which is a intervention phase, B. We had 10, and then 3, 4, 5, 6, 2, and down to 1, and then a change in intensity of the intervention of B1. So let's take a look at that data by typing actually the phase variable by typing pcry. And you could see that there's a phase letter associated with every one of the observations. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 baseline. And then we have the B's associated here to the B phase and the B1s here. Now let's do our band graph by typing the commands for SD1 band graph. Actually, let's do a 2 standard deviation right now and see what that looks like, and we'll go back and do a 1 standard deviation. So let's click on SD2 and you can see the command, and so let's type it, SD2 band graph, and open parentheses, and we'll type in the behavior variable, which is cry, comma pcry. You could also, by the way, if you want to look at, get a better understanding of how data is entered into SSDforR, you could look at our video on entering data using Excel. Now, notice that the arguments are separated by commas, and now I'm going to put in the V1, which represents the phase letter, and we're doing the baseline A, and now I'm going to define the X labels, which are days, and the Y label, which is amount, and I'm going to give it a title, SD2 bands for crying, and that should also be between quotation marks, which I neglected, and should be just one quotation mark. Okay, so the arguments are separated by commas, and make sure you have the quotation marks between the A and also for your various labels. And then we'll just press return, and now we have our graph, and go straight up, and none are above 2 standard deviations, which is a fairly hard criteria to obtain. We could now do it as a 1 standard deviation. And by the way, in the console, you have all the information, the mean, plus and minus 2 standard deviations. So this would be 8.65, and negative 2 would be 0.01. Now I'm going to press the up arrow and repeat that command, and I'm going to make some changes. I'm going to change the SD1 to 1, and here SD2 to 1, and I'm just going to click enter, and now we have a 1 standard deviation band. Now if you wanted to do it across phases, you would use the SD1 or SD2. So let's go to help, and I'm going to click on the index down here, and now I'm going to take a look at SD1. Here you go, and it's basically the same command. So let's press the up arrow. Now I'm just going to change SD1 band graph to SD1, capital SD, and I'm going to keep the A in here because that is what the using that phase, which is the baseline, that will put the baseline standard deviation and means across all the phases. So once you've done that, and it looks like you see on the screen, press return. And now you have the standard deviation and mean across all phases. And here's your data. The mean is 4.33, as it was before. So if you wanted to label the graph and annotate it, you could. So for example, you could put in lines. You could use AB AB lines, and I'm going to type in the behavior variable between parentheses and hit enter, and I'm going to place it between the phase, and I'm satisfied with the line, so I'm going to accept it by typing Y and enter, and I'm going to repeat that command by pressing the up arrow because I want to put another line in here, and just like that, and I'm okay with that line, and yes. Now if you want to also put in the means and standard deviations and so forth, you could do so. So if you type AB text and in between quotation marks the mean, which is 4.33, and hit enter, I'm going to put it here, and going to accept it. And if I wanted to do the upper standard deviation, +1 standard deviation, I would type AB text again and the upper standard deviation is 6.49, one band. And click enter, and I'll put it here. And if you like it, you accept it. If not, you would select no, and you could repeat it. And AB text and the -1 standard deviation of 2.17 between quotation marks. And I will put that here. Now the graph is labeled, and I'm going to accept that and type 1. Now if you want to put in a legend, you could type SD1 legend, but you have to do that after you've annotated the graph. Once you put in a legend, you cannot make any changes to the graph. Okay, so it's SD1 legend, open, close parentheses, and there's legend. And if you wanted to do so, you could export the graph by clicking on export. And you have a few choices. You could save it as an image, or save it as a PDF, or copy it to the clipboard. And you'll have to click copy again, copy plot, and now it's in the clipboard. And you could go into your word processing program, Word or Numbers, and then paste it in. That concludes the video for today.